All right, guys, you made it. We are on chapter 15, the last chapter, and it is called Teacher of the Year. So the dogs are here for their finale performance. We'll see. I think Luna's kind of pooped out. We'll see. Yes, hello. When we came back to our classroom from lunch the next day, I saw my desk. What I mean is, I noticed that it was messy again. Pencils and markers were scattered over the tops, and papers were hanging out, and a few sheets had fallen on the floor. I don't know how it happens. Maybe they're little guys who live inside my desk, and they wait until I'm gone, and then they throw everything around and make a huge mess. Anyway, I remembered what Dad said about trying, and I didn't want to fight with Mrs. Burke anymore, so I decided to stay in from recess for a couple of minutes to clean up my mess. When everybody else lined up at the door, I stayed put. I must be insane, I thought, missing recess to clean up my desk. Hey, Charlie, Hector said, aren't you going outside? I'll be there in a minute, I said. I have to do something first. I'll wait for you, he said. Now go ahead and start the soccer game, I said. I'll be right out. Mrs. Burke came back in the classroom. I guess she didn't have playground duty that day. What are you doing, Charlie? She asked. Nothing, I said. Of course, she could see I was doing something. I was cleaning out my desk. But I just didn't want to say it. It would sound like I was trying to be perfect like Samantha Grunsky or something. Mrs. Burke nodded and didn't say anything. She sat at her desk and watched while I emptied mine and started to put things back. And then she started grading papers. Just me and Mrs. Burke. It's in recess. I could see the playground out the window. Tommy and my other friends were playing soccer. Some first graders were throwing a ball up in the air and catching it right outside of our classroom window. Hector was standing by himself. I wondered why he wasn't playing soccer. I got everything back in my desk. It was neater. All done? Mrs. Burke asked. Uh-huh. Charlie, she said, we seem to have gotten off on the wrong foot, but we're not very far into the year and we still have time to get off to a good start. I hope you'll pay closer attention to what you're doing and try harder to think about the consequences. She stopped for a minute like she was thinking about something else to say, and she looked outside. Hector was still standing by himself. She looked back at me. Do you understand me? She said. I nodded. Now hurry outside or you'll miss all of recess. Use your head, all right? Okay, I said. I know you can do better. I nodded again and ran out the door of the classroom to the hallway. I was hoping I could still get in on the soccer game. No running, she called. I opened the big door and ran out onto the playground. Hey, Charlie, someone called. Help us. It was Brady, the crazy first grader. I see, girl. What is it, Brady? I asked. Our ball, he said, and he pointed up on the roof. One of General Schuler's new blue and white soccer balls was balanced on the edge, stuck in the gutter. Where'd you get that? I said. I found it, Brady said. Then I kicked it up on the roof by mistake. Can you get it down? Where'd you find it? In the gym, Brady said. Can you get it down for us? I looked around. The intergalactic supreme commander was talking with a second grade teacher over by the gym. If he saw Brady with the ball, the first grader was doomed. Can't you ask your teacher for help? I asked. I did. She said she'll ask Mr. Turchin to get it down later. The first grade teachers obviously didn't know about Mr. Schuler, intergalactic supreme commander of soccer balls. Neither did Brady. He didn't have any idea that his life was in danger. Can you please get it down, Charlie? Brady needed help, and fast. I looked up at the ball. I figured if I hit it with a rock, it might fall down. I thought again. Rocks are hard, and what if I missed and it hit the classroom window? I needed something softer to throw. I glanced across the playground. Mr. Schuler hadn't seen us yet, or the soccer ball. The ball had to come down, somehow, some way. Time was running out. What if Mr. Schuler came this way? I looked around for something else to throw, and then an idea hit me. My shoe was just the right size for throwing, and it wasn't heavy enough to break a window. A bunch of the first graders gathered around me, watching me take off my shoe. Some of them giggled. They thought it was funny. They didn't know about Mr. Schuler. I threw my sneaker at the ball, but my shoe hit the gutter and fell to the ground. I hopped over to where it was and picked it up. Now the first graders were laughing and shrieking. I threw my shoe again. This time it hit the ball and knocked it out of the gutter. All the kids squealed and ran for it. Thanks, Charlie, Brady yelled. He grabbed the ball and ran off with it. I was a hero. There was just one problem. My shoe didn't come down. When I backed away from the building, I could see it sticking up out of the gutter. A kid screamed, Charlie's shoe's on the roof! For some reason, everyone thought it was the most hilarious thing that had ever happened. Funnier than a person covered in wads of toilet paper. Funnier than a person hanging from the classroom door. Maybe even funnier than hitting Mrs. Burke with my sneaker. Ha, ha, ha. And then I remembered exactly what she'd said to me last year in the hallway. If you ever throw a shoe in school again, you will stay in from recess for the rest of your life. Soon everyone on the playground was whooping and shrieking and pointing at my shoe on the roof, while I was standing there wearing only one shoe. I felt like a bozo. I was a bozo. All the noise had attracted the attention of the teachers on the playground and the attention of Mr. Schuler. He was marching toward us. Brady and another kid were kicking his new blue and white soccer ball back and forth. "May I have the ball?" he said. And then they gave it to him. "Where did you get this?" he asked. They pointed at me. "Charlie got it for us." "Me? Oh no, boogers!" General Schuler glared at me. "Haven't I talked to you before about gym equipment?" he asked. The general didn't let me finish. "I don't want your excuses." And then he looked down at my feet. "Where's your other shoe?" I pointed to the roof. I could see his neck was getting red. He had a big neck connected to his big head and big shoulders. Just then the fourth graders came up the walk, heading back to class. Samantha Grunsky walked by. "Oh, wow," she said. "Mrs. Burke will just love this." When Tommy saw me with Mr. Schuler, his eyes got big. He tried to save me. "Charlie," he said, "I think Mrs. Burke wants you right now." "Not yet," Mr. Schuler said. Tommy looked at me and shook his head. "Go on inside," Mr. Schuler said to Tommy. The last one in line was Hector. "Mr. Schuler," he began. "Charlie didn't—" "Head on back to class, son," the general said. "But no buts," the general said. Hector gave me a sad look, then went inside. Mr. Schuler looked at his watch. "Hi," and shook his head. "I have a class now," he told me, "but I'm going to talk with your teacher about your behavior. What do you think about that?" Trick question, no good answer. I really wanted to explain, but I didn't say anything. "Get back to your classroom," he said, and he turned and left. But I didn't go back. I didn't want to go back. I wanted to disappear. I sat on this step at the back entrance of the school and tried to remember a time when I had been in more trouble than I was about to be in. I thought about the time I broke a glass door in my grandparents' living room when I was swinging a baseball bat in the house, and the time I flushed Matt's cap down the toilet and water flooded all over the bathroom, and the time I let the air out of one of the tires on my dad's car, by accident, with Tommy. But this was worse. It was like everything I had ever done wrong had all been adding up. Hitting Mrs. Burke in the head with the sneaker, the messy desk, the swinging on the door, the toilet paper, and now this, the shoe on the roof. After my dad had told me not to do any more dumb things. After Mrs. Burke had reminded me to use my head. I was doomed. The general was going to lock me in a smelly gym locker. Mrs. Burke was going to keep me in from recess until forever. My parents would never speak to me again. I don't know how long I sat there. A pretty long time. I knew I should go back to class, but I couldn't do it. I was tossing pebbles into a crack in the sidewalk when I heard the door open behind me. I didn't look. I felt somebody sit down beside me. It was Mrs. Burke. "Buggers!" She sat there for a minute without saying anything. Then she said, "You're missing a shoe." It's on the roof," I said. "I heard," she said. "I asked Mr. Turchin to come out and get it." "Thanks," I said. "You seem to have a problem with your shoes," she said. Her face was very serious. "I guess I do," I said. Just then Mr. Turchin came out the door carrying a ladder. "Hello, Mr. Turchin," Mrs. Burke said. "One of my students seems to have misplaced his shoe." "So I heard," Mr. Turchin said. He acted like it was a very normal thing for a shoe to be on the roof. I wondered if he had had to rescue any other kids' shoes from on top of the school. "Where is it?" he asked. I got up and pointed out where it was. He put the ladder against the roof and climbed up. "Here it is," he said. "Hey, why'd you color it black? Were you going to a funeral?" He chuckled and tossed it down to me. I put it on and tied it tight. "You better put a double knot in it," Mr. Turchin said as he took down the ladder. You don't want it to get away from you again." He laughed his rumbly laugh as he carried the ladder away. Mrs. Burke and I didn't say anything. I felt all confused inside. Mad at myself, mad at Mr. Schuler, mad at the whole world. I could feel my eyes welling up with tears. Finally, I said, "I keep messing everything up." A big tear snuck out of my eye, ran down my cheek, and hung on the end of my nose. I wouldn't worry about Mr. Schuler, Mrs. Burke said. He's going to have to learn how to share the soccer balls. They don't belong to him, you know. That was a funny thing for a teacher to say. I wiped the snot off my face with my shirt sleeve. Hector told me you were trying to help the younger children get their ball back. I nodded. Throwing your shoe wasn't a very good choice, she said, but it was very kind of you to help them. I looked up at her in surprise. I know all about you, Charlie Bumpers, she said. What do you mean, I asked? You keep saying that. She was quiet for a minute, and then she asked, do you know why I put you next to Hector in class? So I would have a neat desk and be good all the time like he is? No, she said. Then why? Because I know Hector would have... Thanks, Luna. I knew Hector would have a hard time when he started here. He comes from a long way away, and this is a big change for him. He needs people to be friendly to him, and when I asked the third grade teachers who the friendliest boy was, Mr. Romano said it was you, and the others agreed. I think my face got red. Something inside me turned over. I sure hadn't expected her to say something nice like that. I smiled a little. Mr. Romano was right. You are friendly to everyone, and I needed someone to be friendly to Hector. Well, that was easy, I said. He's nice. Yes, he is, she said, but if it hadn't been for you, Hector wouldn't have been included so quickly. He wouldn't have had the chance to do something he's good at and win the race, and other kids wouldn't even know his name. I just nodded. It's a funny thing, Mrs. Burke said, how sometimes doing something kind can get you into trouble. I nodded again. That was a pretty interesting idea. And then I thought of something else. Do I have to be friendly to Samantha Grunsky? Her face twisted a little like she was trying not to smile, and then she said, as friendly as you can be. Being mean doesn't really help anything. Okay, I said. I figured I could be a little nice to Samantha Grunsky, if I had to. Now, Charlie, she said, the things I said about helping Hector and being friendly are our little secret, okay? Are our little secret. Okay, I said. I was feeling better and better. I doubted that Mrs. Burke shared very many secrets with her students. Any questions, she asked. Yeah, I said. What? Mrs. Burke, are you going to keep me in from recess for the rest of my life? She looked confused. Why would I do that? Because you said last year if I ever threw my shoe in school again, you'd keep me in from recess for the rest of my life. Then Mrs. Burke laughed. She laughed out loud. She put her arm around me and hugged me. That was a joke, she said. Well, it sure didn't seem like it, I said. You sounded serious. She shook her head. Charlie, I have something to tell you about myself. I have a very dry sense of humor, and I can be very sarcastic. I knew what that word meant. It means saying things you don't really mean in order to be funny. My dad can be sarcastic. He acts like he's serious, and it's funny if you know he's kidding, but you have to know him well enough to know that he's kidding. I guess it was the same with Mrs. Burke. Suddenly everything made a lot more sense. All her talk about her class being a prison and calling the superintendent and burying me like a mummy, it was all supposed to be funny. My dad's like that, I said. So's my brother, Matt. Good, well then you understand. I try to be careful so people know I'm kidding, but sometimes I'm not careful enough and they don't realize I'm joking. Okay, I said. I knew right then that I was going to get along a lot better with Mrs. Burke. I wondered how my dad was doing with Mr. Grimaldi. Are you ready to go back in, she asked. Yep, but then I realized I still had one question. Mrs. Burke, how do you make your fingers explode like that? Explode? Yeah, when you snap them. You mean like this, she said, and then she snapped her fingers. Pow! Yeah, I said, where'd you learn to do that? Mrs. Burke smiled like she was remembering something. I learned it from my mom. She was a teacher, too. Seems pretty handy, I said. Yes, she said, it is. We headed back to the classroom. As we walked down the hallway, she put her hand on my shoulder. Maybe, I thought, it wasn't so weird that she was voted Teacher of the Year. I might even have voted for her if I'd had the chance. When we walked in the room, everybody was staring at us. I sat down at my desk. Hector looked at me. Hi, Hector, I said. Hi, Charlie, he said. Hey, Hector, I said. Cool shoes. He grinned. So are yours. Samantha Grunsky raised her hand. Yes, Samantha, Mrs. Burke said. What's going to happen to Charlie? Mrs. Burke looked at Samantha, and then she said, well, really, class, it's nobody's business what's going to happen to Charlie, but I might as well tell you the terrible truth. I suspect the police will be coming to my empire soon to put him in prison for throwing his sneaker on the roof. She said it with a completely straight face. The class gasped. No one could believe it. Everybody started talking. Pow, 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 exploding fingers. Everyone got quiet. Mrs. Burke looked at me. She raised her eyebrow, and the corner of her mouth turned up just a little. I gave her a little nod. but I didn't give away our secret. My best friend Tommy wasn't in my class. Samantha Grunsky was, and that was too bad. But I had my new friend Hector, and I had Mrs. Burke for a teacher, and that was pretty good. We did it, guys. That was the end. Charlie Bumpers versus Teacher of the Year. Woohoo! So our next thing is our closing ceremony, and that's where we get to take our overall trivia winners, and we're going to have our mummy contest to see who the winning homerooms are. So you guys did a great job. I hope you enjoyed the book. My dogs and I enjoyed reading to you, and I'll see you in the library. Bye-bye. Say bye, Luna. Say bye, Luna. She said it in spirit.